Initiation into Hermetics by Franz Barden. And much respect to the man. Magic Psychic Training 5. The practical instructions of the fourth step have taught us to draw the four elements from the universe into our body, to accumulate these elements, first in the whole body and afterwards in every single part of it, thus producing a tension of elements which let us call dynamite. The body became more elastic with respect to the tension of elements from one exercise to the next one, and more capable of resistance against the effect of pressure. This lesson will bring us further, step by step, and teach us to project and manage the elements outwards, because without the outward projection of elements, any work in practical magic is inconceivable. We have to give our keenest attention to practical work. Sit down in your usual position, inhale through lungs and pores, and, with the help of the imagination, press the element of fire into your whole body. You are inhaling the fire element with the specifical property of heat, and you are exhaling empty breaths. If the warmth in your body seems to be very strong, consequently, if there is a sufficient accumulation of this element, let escape the element through imagination from the solar plexus and fill the entire room you are in at this moment with the fire element. While you empty the element from your body, you should have the feeling that your body is completely delivered from it, and the accumulated element has diffused itself in the whole room, similar to the procedure you followed in the impregnation of a room with vital power. Repeat the accumulation and evacuation several times, and by each emptying, you will accumulate the fiery element all the more in the room. As soon as you are free from the element yourself, you ought to feel how the element is amassing in the room and get the sensation of the room becoming very warm. After some exercising, the warmth in the room will become not only a subjective but a real matter of fact, and any person, magically trained or not, entering this room is actually bound to feel the warmth. A thermometer does indicate how far we are capable to condense our imagination with respect to the fire, so that factually a materially perceptible warmth can be produced in the room. The success of this exercise depends entirely on the willpower and the plastic imaginative faculty. It is not absolutely necessary in this step to bring about such an amount of physical warmth that it can be measured with a thermometer. But supposing a magician takes a keen interest in working in this more spectacular way, he can specialize himself in this problem with the help of these instructions. The genuine magician, however, will not be satisfied with such an insignificant phenomenon, and rather prefer to further his own development, because he is firmly convinced that he can obtain much more as time goes on. The exercise of the outward space projection of the element is fulfilled as soon as the magician can distinctly feel the warmth in the room. Once he has got so far, he has to set free and pour out the accumulated fire element into the infinity, that is the universe again, where it is dissolving spherically in all directions. The magician can now leave the room any time he likes to, without dissolving the element once it has been loaded with it. He can also confine the element to the room for any period of time, just as he did before with the impregnation of a room. All success depends on his willpower and imagination. On the other hand, it is not exactly advisable to leave a room filled with a certain element for a very long time, because beings belonging to the element in question like to do their pranks in such an atmosphere, usually at the cost of the master. You will find out more about this in the chapter concerning the work with element ghosts. Something different should be mentioned at this point. Supposing the magician to do his exercise in the open air, that is, in an unlimited space. He will have to proportion a certain space, no matter how big, for himself, with the help of the imagination. There are no bounds for the imagination, neither here nor there. In the same way as the scholar did his exercises with the fire element, he has to work with the other three elements, and next to the fire he should take up the air. After that the water, and finally the earth. The termination of the exercises belongs to the scholar himself and depends on his time and opportunities. He can deal with one element one day, with the next one the following day, and so on. Or he can accumulate the first element in the morning, the second at midday, the third in the evening, and the fourth element next morning. Scholars who have plenty of time at their disposal and also sufficient willpower can go through all the 4 exercises by turns. These scholars, of course, will make an enormous progress in mastering the elements. A scholar who does control all the 4 elements in this direction may continue. The previous exercise has taught the magician how to accumulate the element inhaled through the solar plexus outwards in the space. In the following exercise, he will learn how to emit an element accumulated through breathing with lungs and pores into the space, not only through the solar plexus, but through the whole body pore breathing, thus producing an accumulation of elements in space. This has to be practiced with all the elements. The dissolving and scattering into the universe has to be performed in exactly the same manner as described in the previous exercise. As soon as the scholar masters this exercise as well, he will proceed to performing this exercise not with the whole body, but with some limbs or parts of the body only. Hands and fingers are usually engaged in magic. Consequently, the scholar ought to devote his full attention to them. He must accumulate the element by pore breathing in one hand or both of them in such a manner that through a sheer motion of his hand, as by flash, he emits the element from his hand into the selected space, impregnating it instantly. Repeated practice makes perfect here as well. The scholar should practice this exercise on all the elements and master it. Then he may continue. Sit like you always do, in your customary position. Inhale the fire element through the lungs and pores of your whole body and accumulate it there until you get the sensation of heat again. Now imagine the accumulated fire element forming a fiery ball of a diameter of 4 to 8 inches, in brackets 10 to 20 centimeters, in the solar plexus. This compressed ball must be so fiery and shining as to be very similar to the sun. Now imagine this ball moving out of its sun network and floating free in the air. Thus floating in the space, the ball ought to be imagined white hot and radiating heat. Stick to this ball imagery as long as you possibly can. If you happen to come near it with your hands, you must feel the heat radiating. Conclude this exercise by dissolving the ball slowly in the universe, or by blowing it by a sudden explosion into the nothingness. Both methods should become familiar to you. You have to deal in the same way with the elements of air, water, and finally with the earth element. For the sake of a clearer imagination while dealing with the air element, give the ball, while compressing it, a sky blue colour. The imagination of water will prove much easier for you. Should you, however, have difficulties with doing so, imagine it in the beginning as a spherical lump of ice. You will certainly have no troubles at all to think the earth element a ball of clay. When you have practiced this exercise with all the 4 element balls and are sure to master it, turn to form different shapes of the elements according to the same method. At first, choose simple forms like cubes, pyramids, cones, etc. The exercise is fulfilled as soon as you manage to condense any element you have accumulated in your body in any form and to project it outwards. Only if the previous exercise can be managed perfectly, the next one can be taken up. An exercise which is dealing with the projection of elements directly from the universe. The practice is as follows. You are sitting in your asana position, breathing calmly and without any effort. Do imagine that you are drawing the fire element out of the endless space, the universe, and fill with it the room you are living in. Imagine the universe in the shape of an enormous ball from which you are drawing the fiery element in all directions right to your room. Remember that the fire element coming from the primary source is the most etheric and subtle. And the more you are pulling it down to you, the more it will become dense, material and hot. You are bound to feel the heat on your own body during this exercise. The more the compressed and accumulated element is being condensed in the room, the stronger will the heat grow. You should actually have the sensation of being in a baking oven. Now dissolve the element again by your willpower and imagination into the infinite. Repeat the same procedure with the air element, drawing it out of the ball-shaped universe down to you from all directions, filling and condensing your room with it. Performing this exercise correctly, you ought to have the sensation of floating in an endless ocean of air, free from any gravity and attractive power. In a room filled in the just described manner, you should feel as light as a balloon. Afterwards, you may dissolve the condensed air element again in its primary substance, in exactly the same way as you did with the fire element. Do likewise with the water element. Imagine you are drawing this element down to you out of an endless ocean, at first in a sort of cold vapour, which you are condensing more and more the nearer you are bringing it to your body and your room. Fill the whole exercise room with this cold vapour and try to imagine yourself to be right in the centre of this illusory water element. You must You must feel icy cold, a sort of cold which causes, as it were, goose pimples on your elemental body. The moment you are feeling this cold, dissolve the water element again in its original form and let it stream away into nothingness. In this manner, the magician is capable to cool and refresh his room in a few moments, even in the hottest summer days. Now try the same experiment with the earth element. Draw out of the universe a grey mass which, similar to clay, is becoming browner and browner the nearer you are bringing it down to yourself. Fill your room entirely with this heavy mass. By doing so, you ought to experience the heaviness and cohesive power as well as its pressure on your own body. Having got the earth element under control through this feeling, dissolve it again into its original material, as you did with the other elements. By now it is quite evident that the drawing down and materializing of the elements is happening exactly there, where we concentrated it. Without the element we are just working with, passing through the body, everything is evidently occurring outside our body. The magician is supposed to master both methods perfectly, because in some special magical tasks he will need an element which has been materialized through his body. For example, in cases of healing sick people or creating subservient ghosts and elementals. On the other hand, he will now and again need the direct, universally condensed element. Mastering this practice too, he is qualified to go ahead. The next exercise will be to draw an element out of the universe. However, not to fill a space as described in the previous exercise, but to condense a self-selected form similar to these exercises, where forms of the element had been condensed in. I'll start that sentence again. The next exercise will be to draw an element out of the universe, however, not to fill a space as described in the previous exercise, but to condense a self-selective form similar to these exercises, where forms of the element had been condensed in brackets, solar plexus, and kept outside the body, sort of floating in the air, but with the difference that the forming of the shape does take place inside of our body, but immediately during its floating in the air. Consequently, the magician must know exactly how to produce a fireball, a ball of air such as a one of water and an earth ball. If he has achieved this performance faultlessly, He has to shape different forms from the elements floating in the space and let these forms dissolve again in the universe after some time. All the time he ought to feel the specific property of the element he is working with quite distinctly. He should be able to induce even a layman or ignorant people, says here, to see and feel the element in question. These are high achievements, indeed, results of great effort in this line. In short, during the course of these exercises, the scholar should have learnt to condense every element of the universe and understand to compress it into any form he likes to. Magicians trained in this line can condense an element to such a degree that it becomes a material power. That's why you can lighten a fire with the help of the fiery element at the greatest distance. At first, practice imaginary drawing a fireball down from the universe directly, without having it passed through the body, and compress it to a small bead so much as to grow a glowing spark. Put this spark in a cotton plug which has been soaked in easily inflammable liquids like ether, petrol, or alcohol. A second spark is to be prepared in the same way with the air element, and the very moment both sparks are touching the cotton plug, it will catch fire and begin to burn. Having succeeded in this little trick, the magician can make an attempt with the wick of an ordinary candle and later on with a paraffin lamp. He can do this near and far. Apart from it, he can also confine a spark to and enclose in a normal tumbler or a bottle, and fling a water spark into this container as quick as a flash. As soon as these two sparks are touching each other, both elements will explode and the glass or the bottle will break off in 1,000 chips. The magician can compose such artifices by himself because he knows and masters the rules. The genuine magician will not waste his time with such dallying. He does know very well that he could produce as well as stop phenomena such as lightnings, thunder, rain, heavy thunderstorms by means of the elements. All these forces which strike the layman as wondrous manifestations are for the magician things that go without saying, and it is entirely up to himself whether he likes to specialize in the line of phenomena or prefers to continue with his magical development. It is also a well-known fact to him that the Oriental fakirs, only by mastering the elements, accomplish their genuine mango tree miracle from seed to fruit within 1 hour's time. Besides, the learner has the possibility of controlling the material condensation of an element physically by throwing the condensed form of an element into a glass of clean or, even better, sterilized water and repeating this action several times. He will state that with fire, the taste of the water will appear sort of acidulous, with air sweetish, with water astringent dry, and with earth musty. This occurrence can be tested chemically by dipping a small stripe of litmus paper into the prepared water. If the water has been impregnated very thoroughly, one will notice that an acid reaction will occur on the litmus paper when the active elements, namely fire and air, are concerned, while in the case of water and earth the reaction will be an alkaline one. Who would not be reminded of the wedding of Cana, where our Lord did transform the water into wine? Only such a high adept as Jesus Christ did accomplish this miracle, not by the influence of elements from the outside, but by mastering the Akasha principle of the water being transformed from the inside. At this point, I shall finish the mastering of elements as far as the magical training of the soul in step 4 is concerned. Nobody is expected to advance before he has not been working thoroughly through all the exercises and tasks. The exercises are all going hand in hand, interdepending on each other. I take it for granted that it will not enter anybody's mind to stick to single exercises and methods only. The result would be fateful to the health of the person, and the success would never come. These facts have to be considered very carefully. But he who does perform one exercise after the other scrupulously can proceed with a clear conscience and can work on the magical development at full blast.